Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, and this is episode number 233 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And in this episode, we're here to talk about another week that was and another week that will be around the 2024 NFL season. So that week that was, week number 14, and the week that will be coming up relatively soon, week number 15. So plenty to talk about here in this episode. So we're not going to waste any further time before we get right into it. I know I said I didn't want to waste any time, but got to do a little housekeeping before we get started. So without any further ado, make sure you follow Very Cold Lasagna on all the socials that I'm at Very Cold Lasagna. For all my audio listeners out there, make sure you've listened to it on wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like button, smash the subscribe button if you're not already, which you should, by the way. Smash the notification bell so you'll be notified of each and every upload that goes up, whether it's a podcast episode or an upload like a regular video. And then leave a comment down below with your own takes on each and every episode topic or video topic. In this case, it's another week that was and will be around the NFL. And make sure you share this with your friends, share this with your neighbor, share this with a stranger, share this with your colleagues, whether it's at work or school. Make sure you share the good, the bad, the ugly about this podcast entitled Very Cold Lasagna. That being said, let's get right into the week that was first, and then we'll work our way into another week that will be week number 15, because we're getting right down to the wire, ladies and gentlemen. There are just 5 weeks left in this NFL season. If my math serves me correctly, I believe so. 5 weeks left around the NFL. Every team has about 5 or so games left in this NFL season. So, yeah, that being said, let's talk about the week that was. Week number 14, as we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of this season. But, yeah, all these teams that were playing this week, we had one more set of teams, the final set of teams that took their late out-of-date vacay this past week. Those teams included the Ravens, the Broncos, the Texans, the Colts, the Patriots, and the Commanders. I feel like half of these teams that are on this bye-bye list have been like a yearly occurrence since they've had the Week 14 bye. That started back in, I believe, 2021? Yeah, I feel like the Commanders and the Patriots have been on this list ever since it started. But, hey, you get a late bye, so it counts for something, I guess. But nonetheless, those teams were on bye-bye, and they'll be playing in their last 4 games of the season, much like everyone else will be going forward. So, looking at the playoff picture pre-Week 14, already clinching their division was the Buffalo Bills, and, well, already clinching their trip to Cancun included the New York Giants, the Las Vegas Raiders, the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Patriots, who, like I said, were on bye this week. So, looking ahead to this week's, week 14 at least, clinching possibilities. The Lions were able to clinch a playoff spot. The Chiefs could clinch the AFC West. The Eagles and the Vikings could get their playoff spots, which required a number of things to happen this past week. And then you look at the teams that were eligible to also join the early trip to Cancun, which were the Panthers, the Jets, the Skid Marks, a.k.a. the Browns, and the Titans. So who's going to clinch either their postseason trip to the dance or their trip to Cancun early in January? We're going to find out in the week that was, week number 14, which kicked off with Thursday Night Football, only for that Jeff Bezos money, pal, as the Lions and the Packers went back and forth in this seesaw affair in the NFC North, and the Lions came out on top, just barely though, and by the skin of their teeth, and Dan Campbell showing his big cojones, pal, with a very aggressive 4th down call. He thought we were going to go for the field goal, but no. He wanted to show off his big cojones, go for it on a 4th down to get the game-winning field goal, get his kicker within a little bit closer, and yeah, they won the game 34-31, get the second straight playoff spot, and get an inch closer to clinching the NFC North. So, man, you want to talk about a potential Coach of the Year candidate and potential lock for Coach of the Year? It's Dan Campbell. He has this team firing on all cylinders despite the injuries to the defense, which, by the way, yeah, I'm still a little bit weary about that defense with all the injuries that they've been having, but they've been playing, they've been having those key spots, getting those key stops. I just am concerned with how much depth they're going to have with all those injuries. Hopefully they'll be restocking some of those players. Hopefully some of those players will be able to come back for the playoff run. And going back to Dan Campbell, gotta be a little bit more careful with quote unquote playing with fire too much, because he had a little bit scared on that 4th down call, or like deep in his own territory where he failed on 4th down, and that nearly cost him the game. So you gotta be a little more careful there. Meanwhile, for the Packers, they almost won this game, but almost is never enough. And they currently certainly used more from their quarterback, Jordan Love. He didn't play necessarily a bad game, but he quite didn't do enough for his team. So it was mainly like the Josh Jacobs show again. And then he got certainly some from his receiving core, but yeah, they currently use some more effort from their quarterback, Jordan Love. So hopefully they'll get more of that in the coming weeks to try and make one more push for the NFC North, but we'll see. Currently going into the Sunday slate of games, starting with the early morning portion, as this game, surprisingly, between the Dolphins and the Jets, went to overtime. And Jason Saunders had to make a 50-plus long field goal to help the Dolphins get into that extra period, where Tua led the Dolphins down the field and found Jonnu Smith, his tight end, for the game-winning touchdown to keep their slim playoff hopes alive and send the Jets to their early trip to Cancun, 32-26 in the extra period. And yeah, the Dolphins, they're not quite dead yet in the playoff race, but they really got to clamp down on defense. Their offense is doing fine. Credit to them, but the Dolphins defense, it's getting very sketchy. They've allowed way too many points in the last 2 weeks, and the offense had to save them with this game. It's not like the Jets are like a great team, but the fact that you've allowed this many points to the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, not great. Meanwhile, for the Jets, they do give plenty of scare as a spoiler team to those trying to make the playoffs or teams fighting for seeding. But I mean, at this rate, with 4 games left to go, why are you doing it? Why are you risking your own off-season goals, your plans, especially ones that could involve Aaron Rodgers at quarterback? So, I mean, I'm not saying, oh, you got to tank, or maybe you should tank. But if you want to have a long-term reset at quarterback, might as well shut down Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it's the way to go. Meanwhile, in mini, between the Minnesota Vikings and the Atlanta Falcons, Sam Darnold threw for 5 touchdowns as the Vikings went on a 21-point blitz in the 4th quarter to crush Kirk Cousins and spoil his homecoming in Minnesota, 42-21. Yeah, this game was relatively close up until the 4th quarter, where the Vikings just went ham on the Falcons. So yeah, if you're the Falcons and their fan base right now, it's not looking really good right now. Kirk Cousins is in a major slump that even with this soft schedule coming up that starts next Monday night, it's might be a little too late. Like Kirk Cousins, he hasn't looked really good. His passes, not really exactly good decisions. And he hasn't thrown a touchdown since that 4-game losing streak started. So been making a lot of poor throws. Like 2 games against 2 teams destined for the top 2 in the draft. I mean, sure, it could be the cure. But if he somehow loses against these 2 teams that are fighting for the top 2 in the draft, what if it's not? So might be too little too late for Kirk Cousins to recover from this major slump. Meanwhile, for the Minnesota Vikings, they're playing relatively good football right now. They're on a hot streak. This is not necessarily a weekly take on Minnesota, but more of a little like longer term take on them. It's like, what are you going to do with Sam Darnold in the offseason? Like, with how well he's playing right now, it's like these final 4 games of the season are going to be a determining factor of, man, what do you do with him? It's like, do you pay the guy? Do you franchise tag him? Do you let him go? Because they also have to consider J.J. McCarthy, their first round pick. And even though he didn't play because of the significant knee injury that kept him out all year, so they have to consider what to do with Sam Darnold and what's going to happen in these next 4 games. So it's a very interesting spot that the Vikings are in, especially once they get a playoff spot. So I think that's a really interesting challenge that the Vikings are going to face, but could be a good challenge for them. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Saints went to the big blue side of the Meadowlands to take on the lifeless and hapless Giants that Drew Lock somehow got the big G-men into a game-time field goal position to try and force overtime, but they would be denied as the Saints, Brian Breesy blocked Graham Gano's game-time field goal as the Saints held on 14-11. But unfortunately for the Saints, that win came at a price because Derek Carr, he left the game with another injury. He suffered a fracture in his non-throwing hand, and the Saints have already ruled that he's going to be out for multiple weeks, and it's actually several weeks, and that's basically an end to his season. These last 4 games, it's basically over for New Orleans. So at this point, yeah, the season's basically over for New Orleans. They're very slim. They're very delusional playoff hopes, as if there were any. It's basically done. Meanwhile, if you look at from the Giants' perspective, they're already 2-10. If you looked at the blocked field goal, for all the Giants fans out there, it's like, please make this field goal. If you were hoping for a win, you're kind of delusional. This is a blessing in disguise for them because by losing, you jump all the way up to the first overall pick that you're desperately fighting the Raiders against. This is something that you'll want to maintain in the final 4 games of the year. Which is a given, maybe, because of who you play in those final 4 games. So, something to watch for. Meanwhile, in the link, Darius Slay came up with a big clutch play with a big 4th down stop as they had to hold off the Carolina Panthers, the Eagles that is. They stopped the Panthers' last-minute comeback attempt. The Eagles held them off 22-16. Yeah, surprisingly, Philadelphia was in a barn burner against the 3-9 Carolina Panthers. But hey, Bryce Young, again, playing his way into the Panthers' potential off-season plans. The Panthers really have to consider keeping Bryce Young around. They got to rethink their strategy and potentially give Bryce Young some major help. But of course, I would consider bringing in a quarterback to compete with Bryce Young, because just because Bryce Young's doing well now doesn't mean that success will carry over into the next season. So, I still hope Bryce Young will sustain that success into next season, but you got to get the guy some help. You got to get him some help, get him a better O-line. That ownership group, that front office, for as bad as it is, I just hope they do something right by him. Meanwhile, for the Eagles, as they try to secure their playoff spot, which they did, by the way, with some help, they really need to get something going with this passing attack. Don't get me wrong, Saquon has been excellent for them. They're a major reason why the Eagles have won 9 straight since late September. But the Eagles, they absolutely had no reasons to let the Panthers hang around for as long as they did until the last second. Like, the reason why? They can't get into going with Jalen Hurts and the passing game. Like, why was A.J. Brown, why was Devontae Smith held to, I believe it's like less than 50 yards passing, less than 50 yards receiving, both apiece? Like, you can't have that. And Jalen Hurts only had like less than 150 yards passing, and he didn't exactly perform that great either when you look at the highlight package. So, yeah, this trio, like that for as mid as they did last year, like Jalen Hurts as a passer, not exactly lighting up the world like this season either. So it's raising a little bit of alarms going into a playoff appearance. So as they get closer to wrapping up the division too, you really got to get Jalen Hurts in this Eagles passing game. You really got to get it going. Otherwise, it's going to be their downfall when they face a better team, if there is any, in this NFC playoff picture. Meanwhile, down in Pittsburgh, the Steelers faced the Browns in a Week 12 rematch, which the Steelers avenged, where the defense forced a litany of mistakes by the skid marks, as the Steelers exacted revenge from onto the Browns, 27-14 in that matchup. And if you look at the bright side for the skid marks, well, at least they were. They had many chances to try and come back in this game, very late in the game, but unfortunately they muffed on pretty much all of them. But I mean, hey, at least the head coach Kevin Stefanski at least has them trying. At least it has them competing to a degree. But unfortunately, the talent around them, it's just not there. It's just not there. But I just hope that the front office, the ownership, they give Kevin Stefanski at least one more year to try and rebuild this squad. Meanwhile, for the Steelers, they put on another really good performance. Yes, I know it's the skid marks, but they're making themselves known as a sneaky yet kind of legit Super Bowl contender. They're kind of like an under the radar Super Bowl contender. They got some pretty balanced effort on both sides of the ball. They're playing well on defense. They just got Alex Highsmith back. Russell Wilson, I say relatively clean game. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. They face the Ravens in the rematch. And in a couple of weeks they're about to face the Eagles. Oh no, I believe it's next week. They face the Eagles, and in a couple of weeks they face the Chiefs. So these next few weeks are going to be major tests for Pittsburgh. So this is kind of like their tune-up for them. Meanwhile, down in Tampa, the Bucs took on the Raiders as Rachaad White. He had 3 rushing touchdowns in this one, and that lifted the Bucs past a beaten-up Raiders team, 28-13. But even more bad news for the Raiders. Aiden O'Connell suffered a knee injury, which I thought initially was a very bad injury because he got carted off with an air cast on his knee. But it seems like later reports, when I read it from Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, and all that, it seemed like it's not as bad of an injury as it is. So, I mean, that's good. That he'll be okay, it seems. And they're already saying that he might have a chance to play next week, which is insane. But yeah, it just goes to show that, yeah, it's been that kind of season for the Raiders when it comes to not just the quarterback position, but just in general. But I mean, it's good that Aiden O'Connell that didn't suffer a much more significant injury. So I'm glad that he's like kind of healthy-ish. But if the Raiders do have to turn to another quarterback, they're gonna have to go with Desmond Ridder for their next matchup. Meanwhile, for the Bucs, I mean, they're right back in the saddle with the NFC South. They've overtaken Atlanta for the division. Where they were 2 months ago, all seemed lost. The Falcons had this big lead on the division, but the Bucs had things fall right back on their side to take back control of the division. They're at 7-6 right now. The Falcons at 6-7. So Tampa pretty much controls its own destiny with the final 4 games of the year. I mean, both teams have a relatively soft schedule for the rest of the way. It's just a matter of who wants it more at this point. In terms of Tampa, it's just a matter of whether they have the grapefruits to win out and keep the Falcons at bay, stopping them from, letting them overtake the division. So it's going to be on Baker Mayfield and the Bucs to whether or not they can seal up the division by that point. Meanwhile, in a game that, well, somebody had to win, the Jacksonville Jaguars met the Tennessee Titans. Tank Bigsby, he scored an 8-yard touchdown in this, again, a game that somebody had to win in the fourth quarter, and that was enough for the Jaguars to beat the Titans in a game that somebody had to win 10-6. So, unfortunately for the Jaguars, it was a win that came at a price, because had the Jags lost this game, they would have been in position to keep their standing for the top pick in next year's draft. Not that they needed a quarterback because, well, they already have Trevor Lawrence, who's on season-ending IR with the concussion. But they could have used that number 1 overall pick as a trade asset. A trade asset for a desperate team in need of a quarterback. So a number 1 overall pick that could have been used as a trade asset to trade down for more draft picks while still getting their own coveted pick at wherever they were going to pick. So for the Jaguars, well, there's still some time left. There's still some time left for the Jaguars to lose a bunch of games and then hope that luck comes their way, that one of the other bottom-feeding teams like the Giants, the Raiders, they slip up and win a game or two. And maybe the Jaguars, they own the top pick, and then they can use that as bait. But yeah, by winning this game, it doesn't do them any favors. I mean, but hey, like I said, somebody had to win this one, right? And that ended up being the Tennessee Titans, who really need to figure out the quarterback this offseason, because it's clear Will Levis is not the answer. And if it isn't, they better make sure that next man up will be. Let's look at the late afternoon slate of games in this key NFC West division matchup in a rematch of week number 12. This one taking place in the desert. The Seattle Seahawks beat the Arizona Cardinals 30-18 thanks to Zach Charbonnet's big 2-touchdown day and getting the season sweep over the Cardinals and a key division win that puts the Seahawks at 8-5 and I believe 4-2. No, I don't know what the record is. Like 3-2 on the division now. So gained some major leverage on this NFC West division race. And when you look at how the Seahawks played in this game, Smith was all right as a passer, but it was the running game that really got the Seahawks up and running in this one. Zach Charbonnet had a big day, and it makes you wonder, like, why didn't the Seahawks go to the running game earlier? They should have been running the ball even more with Kenneth Walker III, Zach Charbonnet, and so on. I mean, the passing game was, yeah, it was quiet, but they were still effective because how the running game was, and it set up the passing game. I said this before, and I'm saying it again. They need to have running performances like Zach Charbonnet did to set up Geno Smith in the offense. So they repeat that in their final 4 games, and they wrap up the NFC West. And looking at the Arizona Cardinals, you needed to have this game, and, well, you failed. You, once again, hit that late season slump, and at this point, it doesn't matter if Cliff Kingsbury's your coach, if John Degane's your coach. That season slump is going nowhere. Kyler Murray, once again, he looks ineffective. He can't finish drives. He kept turning the ball over. And the defense keeps on giving him up points. So Arizona had people talking midseason of, oh, things have changed. They look so effective. Marvin Harrison Jr. is coming alive. The offense looks pretty damn good. But now the talk is about how Arizona fell apart once again, especially after the bye, man. Meanwhile, looking at a big contest down in SoFi, it was a shootout between the LA Rams and the Buffalo Bills as Josh Allen and the Bills roared back from a 17-point deficit late in the fourth quarter. But Matthew Stafford and his offense converted enough key first downs to milk enough clock and hold off the Bills 44-42. That was a crazy ass game in Los Angeles. And yeah, this is a big win for the Rams, a big upset win for the Rams that allows them to keep pace with the Seahawks, and is courtesy of a grand performance from its stars. That quartet of Stafford, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Kyron Williams, they were all strong contributors. And if they can get repeat performances from all 4 of them going forward, they can make one last push for the division. if they can get sustained performances from them. So, yeah, don't count these Rams out just yet. Meanwhile, for the Bills, this is not the loss that you needed. You couldn't have this kind of loss coming off of winning the AFC East, and trying to catch up with Kansas City for the number 1 seed in the playoffs. So this is not something that you needed. And there were already people saying like, "Oh, this is all Josh Allen's fault," when basically he was trying to get the team back in the game. You look at how that defense played. There was no pass rush, and especially the back end of the defense, the secondary, they were getting cooked. They were getting torched in that game. So the Bills lost this game because this defense got repeatedly burnt to a crisp, like burnt toast, when you cook that ass. So for the first time in 2 months after that, I believe it was the Texans game, yeah, they were getting burnt. Like they couldn't keep up with the litany of the Rams' weapons. So if they had trouble with this group, just imagine what's going to happen next week when they go to Detroit. Meanwhile, down at Levi's, the 49ers, from start to finish, they beat the brakes off the Chicago Bears 38-13 with Brock Purdy, Juwan Jennings, and Isaac Grendo's 2 touchdowns apiece. Led the way to an easy win over the Bears, finally snapping their 3-game losing skid. And I say finally because where was this Niners all season long? Why weren't they looking this effective, like, from the beginning? Like, where was this? Like, seriously. Like, where was this Niners team? Like, come on now. But in all seriousness, this game pretty much said more to me. I talked about this in my dedicated recap of this game, so make sure you go check that out after listening to this episode. But this game says more about how bad the Bears were than how good the Niners were. Like, look at how the Bears played. Sure, Caleb Williams notched 2 touchdowns to Romeo Odunze, but around all that, he took multiple drive-killing sacks because he held on to the ball for too long. And the Bears defense, from the opening drive that Brock Purdy had, they got their butts lit up. They allowed so much open space to George Kittle, Juwan Jennings, even Debo, and they got gashed on the ground by Isaac Grendo. So, in all honesty, we didn't really learn all that much about whether this is a one-shot thing for San Francisco or turning of the corner for them. We learned basically that this Bears team, they're that bad, even if they have an interim head coach in Thomas Brown. So maybe we also learned that Thomas Brown is also not the guy that the Bears should be considering as their permanent head coach. So looking at the Sunday Night Football game for week number 14, as the Chiefs met the Chargers in this key AFC West showdown in a rematch of week number 4, as Patrick Mahomes, he converted a key third down to Travis Kelce to set up Matthew Wright's game-winning and AFC West clinching field goal just by a bare bank shot to beat the Chargers 19-17. And I'm just asking myself, how the hell did the Chiefs keep getting away with this? Like, it's we're 14 games in, or like 13 if you count the bye. We're like 14 weeks in the season, and it's just like, how the hell did they keep getting away with this? I'm saying the loud part out loud now because at this point, it's just getting ridiculous, man. All but one team this season, that being the Bills, all they had to do was beat the Chiefs, who aren't even playing their best football right now. Yet they can't because of either ref ball shenanigans or their own bullshit. That being the opposition's bullshit. They just keep getting in their way, in their own damn way. But I mean, the Chiefs have 4 more games to find their stride. They can go 3-1 to get the top seed, and we have to ask ourselves: is anyone gonna stop them? Is anyone gonna stop their voodoo magic once January rolls around? Are the Chiefs gonna finally come together? Because by the time January rolls around, they might just find their form. Meanwhile, looking at the Monday Night Football game to wrap up our Week 14 part of this episode, there's some crazy stuff that was happening at the end of this game, because a blocked punt by the Cowboys went awry. It went bad because I didn't even know you could do this. They blocked a punt, but then a Cowboys player touched it. They tried to recover it, and the Bengals took advantage of that, and they got the ball back. And Joe Burrow and the Bengals, they took advantage of that second chance with a go-ahead touchdown to Jamar Chase, and they stopped Cooper Rush and the Cowboys on the ensuing possession, winning that game 27-20. Oof. If you're the Cowboys. Oof. And I didn't figure that you could lose a game like you did with how the Cowboys did. If that makes any sense. Like, don't coaches teach players like not to do that? Like, don't they teach players not to touch the ball after something like that, after they successfully blocked a field goal? Oh, no, not a field goal, a punt? Like, don't they teach players not to do that? Like, that's just shitty. That's just shitty luck, man. That's just very bad. But either way, it's just like, that's just awful. Like a bunch of, I don't know. I guess like Twitter, X, social media was ablaze. All the Cowboys fans were like coming out in full force, calling for the head of that player that tried to catch the bouncing ball, and then obviously didn't get it, and then the Bengals recovered it. So, yikes. Yikes. So that was your week that was. And we're going to get into the week that will be in just a second. But let me know your thoughts on this past week in the NFL, that being week 14. And let me know if your team is in the playoffs or your team has taken the trip down to Cancun and already planning what they're going to do in January. Whether it's in the comments on YouTube or slide to the DMs on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna. So let's hand out some stars for week number 14. And half of them go to the Minnesota Vikings. Starting with Sam Darnold, 22 of 28, 347 yards, 5 touchdowns in that big game against the Atlanta Falcons. Same thing with the receiving duo of Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Addison had 8 catches, 133 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson, 7 catches, 132 yards, and 2 touchdowns in a game where he finally managed to break open again for the first time in like forever this season. So, yeah, he finally managed to come out, and maybe he'll do so again next week. We're going to have another big game that he can break it open, break the bank. But we'll talk about that in the week that will be. Chiefs kicker, Matthew Wright, 4 for 4 on his field goals, and including the bank shot game winner that clinched the AFC West for Kansas City. So those are your 3 stars of the week here on Very Cold Lasagna when it comes to the NFL Week 14. Who are your 3 stars? Let me know. So now, let's move on to the week that will be week number 15. We are just 15, 16, 17. 4 weeks. 4 weeks left in the NFL's 2024 season. Wow. Think of where we were in September, just reminiscing. We were getting ready for week 1. That week 1 kickoff game between the Ravens and the Chiefs. We were sitting here getting ready with our Filthy Casuals guide. My Filthy Casual butt. Getting you ready for the week that will be week number 1. And here we are with just 4 weeks left of the season. And we're already in practically playoff mode or Cancun mode for those of you ready for Cancun. So, yeah, no more teams left on bye. Everyone is either in playoff chase mode or ready to go on that Cancun cruise. So, that being said, before we get into the game slate for week number 15, we got to do our playoff check-in because that's pretty much all it's going to be going forward the rest of the way. So, looking at the playoff picture currently, who's in the playoffs already? That's teams being the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs, who've already clinched their divisions. The Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles are also in. They've yet to clinch the division yet, though. And the teams that are already ready for the January Cancun cruise include the New York Giants, the Raiders, the Jaguars, the Patriots, the Jets. So basically both New York teams, the skid marks, aka the Browns and the Titans. So when you look at this week's clinching possibilities, who can further clinch their spot into the January dance, that being the postseason dance, the Eagles can wrap up the NFC East if they can beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they need the Commanders to somehow slip up to the Derek Carr-less Saints. The Minnesota Vikings can secure their playoff spot by winning this week, or they need the Rams or the Seahawks to lose their games. They can find out as soon as this Thursday if they are in the playoffs. Meanwhile, for the Texans, when they return from their bye week, they can clinch the AFC South with a win over the Miami Dolphins, and they need the Colts to lose to Denver. As for the Steelers, all they have to do to secure their playoff spot is win, baby. Meanwhile, this week's eligible teams to join the January Cancun Cruise include the Panthers, the Cowboys, the Bears, and the Bengals. The Bengals, and I believe so the Cowboys, they need some extra help to join the January Cancun Cruise. So now let's look at the week that will be week number 15. And it all begins with this Thursday night matchup only for that Jeff Bezos money on Prime Video. And it's a major NFC West tilt between the LA Rams at 7-6 taking on my San Francisco 49ers. And it's the Niners' second. Actually, it's both of their second Thursday night matchups. And it's a rematch from week number 3. And like I said, it's a major one as the Niners look to avenge that last-second loss to the Rams, which was their own fault, by the way, in this critical NFC West contest. And if you look at it from the Niners' perspective, they seriously need this one to keep their, what I call, delusional playoff hopes alive via the NFC West. So the Niners, they somehow kept their hopes alive somehow, some way by snapping a 3-game losing skid. But against a red-hot Rams team who need to keep pace with the Seahawks, well, one of these teams got to have it here. And one of the other teams that will lose this game, they're going to see their playoff hopes die. Looking at the Sunday slate of games, starting with the early morning portion, as both the Dallas Cowboys at 4-8 take on the 3-10 Carolina Panthers. Both teams look to keep their last bit of simmering playoff hopes alive when Cooper Rush and the Cowboys visit Bryce Young and the Panthers. Bryce Young playing decently well. He's been playing very solid football. And surprisingly, somehow, some way, the Panthers are still alive in the playoff race. I thought they were eliminated last week, but apparently not. That's because, well, the NFC South is kind of trash. Let's not kid ourselves. But anyway, both teams are somehow still alive in the playoff race, but this week I think it'll end. But like I said, with the Cowboys, they need some help, in air quotes, to be eliminated. Meanwhile, looking at the Kansas City Chiefs at 12-1, they turned their focus on attaining the AFC's top seed while also hoping to finally have a stress-free game for once in their life this season when they visit the skid marks, a.k.a. the Cleveland Browns at 3-10, who look to play spoiler to the Chiefs' dreams. But we'll see. They've had a mistake-filled game last week against the Steelers, so not counting on it. Meanwhile, this is a key game in week number 15 as the Miami Dolphins at 6-7 take on the 8-5 Houston Texans. C.J. Stroud returning from his bye week along with the Texans. Well-rested, ready for a run, hopefully better than what we saw all of November to face Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins, who remain alive in the playoff race, but we'll see for how much longer. I mean, not saying that's a bad thing, but let's see how they'll do, especially with that defense, which is a bit of a concern. But this should be a very interesting matchup with some playoff lives at stake. Meanwhile, for this matchup right here, it's more than just a game. Yeah, it's not just a game, pal. It's a choo-choo tank game as Mac Jones and the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars at 3-10 look to see if they can outsuck Aaron Rodgers and the Jets at 3-10 in a battle of who wants it less, pal. who wants a top 5 pick, much less than the other in this kind of game. So, yeah, should be a battle of who wants it less in that one. Meanwhile, down in the big hard, Jane Daniels and the Commanders at 8-5 return from their bye week, hopefully well rested for their stretch run. Hopefully, by some miracle, a crack at the NFC East, but they'll settle for a wild card spot. So they take on whatever remains of a beat up New Orleans Saints team at 5-8, as the Commanders, like I said, they push for that top wild card spot. Down in the big blue side of the Meadowlands, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens at 8-5 return from their bye week as well, looking to lock up at least a top wildcard spot at this point because, well, like I said, they're not catching up to the Steelers unless, again, by some miracle, the Steelers start slipping up. But anyway, the Ravens head to the big blue side of the Meadowlands to face the no-name Giants, looking to secure the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft. Meanwhile, down in Tennessee, the Music City, the Bengals at 5-8 look to keep their very small hopes at a playoff spot alive when they travel to the Music City to face Will Levis and the Titans at 3-10, looking to keep their hopes for the number 1 overall pick, or at least a top 5 pick alive. But that remains to be seen. And moving forward to the late afternoon slate of games, as Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, they seriously need to snap their 3-game losing skid. Because at 6-7, if they want to stay alive in this NFC West title hunt, they got to win this game against a well-rested New England Patriots squad that, sure, they're not winning any games right now at 3-10, and they're already looking forward to the draft. But, I mean, Drake May is still playing relatively decent football with the crap supporting cast that he has. But, I mean, it still could play spoiler to their hopes. Meanwhile, an interesting matchup in the Mile High comes between 2 playoff hopefuls and 2 high draft picks, as Anthony Richardson and Bo Nix do battle. I believe this is an underrated matchup between these 2 quarterbacks. Like, I'm really intrigued how this one's going to turn out. Both teams are well rested. Both teams are coming in fresh. So I'm pretty intrigued how this matchup between 2 potential wildcard teams is going to turn out. I really am. Meanwhile, in the matchup of week number 15, well, I say that with a bunch of matchups that are happening around the league. Josh Allen, the Bills at 10-3, look to rebound from a tough loss in LA, but oh boy, with that defense, that might be easier said than done against an even hotter offense in Jared Goff and the habanero hot Detroit Lions at 12-1. In what could be a potential Super Bowl preview in New Orleans. So, we could be served an appetizer for what's to come in February. But we'll see what happens here. I worry, though, for, again, that Bills defense. Meanwhile, down in the powder blue side of Los Angeles, Baker Mayfield and the 7-6 Tampa Bay Bucks look to expand their lead on the NFC South when they head out west to face Justin Herbert and the LA Clip Chargers at 8-5, who now have to focus on getting a wildcard spot after losing out on the AFC West last Sunday night against the Chiefs. So, like I said, they got to set up for a wildcard spot and fend off Denver. They got to fend off Baltimore and a bunch of other teams trying to vie for one of the wildcard spots. Meanwhile, down in Philadelphia, it's the latest edition of the Battle of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it's going to be a big one. It could also serve as a potential Super Bowl preview. So you have two potential Super Bowl previews, and one of them includes the Steelers. That defense colliding with Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, and that Eagles offense. Steelers at 10-3, the Eagles at 11-2. Something has to give in this Battle of Pennsylvania, in this potential Super Bowl preview. I'm intrigued. Again, like I said with the Steelers, they're a quiet Super Bowl contender, and if they somehow upset the Eagles in this one, now they might become a loud Super Bowl contender after this week. Then we have the Sunday Night Football game for week number 15 as the 9-4 Green Bay Packers and Jordan Love, they got a rebound from a tough loss in Detroit, and they head out northwest to take on Geno Smith and the Seahawks at 8-5, looking to keep their hold on the NFC West and keep the distance away from either the LA Rams or my 49ers in that division. Meanwhile, we got ourselves one of the final two Monday Night Football doubleheaders, because there is that one other one in the last week of the season, but it's on a Saturday. Forgive me, okay? We have the technically last Monday Night Football doubleheader, and one of them involves Bears football at 49, heading up to the winter wonderland of the Minnesota Vikings at 11-2. I say winter wonderland because they're wearing all white. It's the winter whiteout in Minnesota on a Monday night, as Sam Darnold and the winter white Vikings aim to keep their red hot momentum going and keep pace with Detroit, and hoping they slip up just a little once when they face Caleb Williams and the Bears in a rematch from Week 12. The Bears, they're pretty much down and out of it at this point, but Sam Darnold and the Vikings look to keep the good times rolling in the first of two Monday Night Football games. And the second one includes the 6-7 Atlanta Falcons, as Kirk Cousins hopes that a trip to the Sin City will be the cure to his ongoing slump, as well as the rest of the Falcons squad, when he and the Falcons take on this tanking Raiders team at 2-11, who, at this point, we don't even know who's going to be starting at quarterback. Is it going to be a beat-up Aiden O'Connell, who I hope is healthy enough to play? Or is it going to be Desmond Ridder, his old team, but plenty of turnover problems? So we'll see what happens this coming week, in week number 15, as we begin our last push. We begin the last march to the most wonderful time of the year. And of course, it's December football, but the real most wonderful time of the year in the NFL season, and I'm talking about the playoffs. Playoffs? Yes, playoffs. So let me know your picks. Let me know your predictions. Let me know how your team will or won't do in this coming week number 15 in the comments on YouTube, or slide into the DMs on social media at Very Cold Lasagna, and let's have a conversation about it, pal. And of course, let me know about this past week for your team or other teams around the NFL in week number 14. We can also have a conversation about that as well, as again, we begin this last push, the last 4 weeks of the season. We begin that one last push towards the playoffs. And that begins with week number 15. So, yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm ready for some madness, pal. Hopefully, it'll be some crazy good football, some crazy tight games. It's always like that when we get to the final couple weeks in the regular season, and especially from the top tier teams, even the middle tier teams. They're desperate to make the dance. So, should be a fun couple weeks, hopefully. And I'm all for it, man. I'm all for it. So, I hope you are too. We'll talk about it in the next episode of Very Cold Lasagna. So thank you for tuning into this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. And this was episode number 233 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all those filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And it's been a crazy week so far. We had two 49ers related videos with the Bears recap, the Rams game preview, this episode, and I got a little treat for you tomorrow here on the podcast, commemorating a certain 25th anniversary of a certain event that happened in wrestling. So stay tuned for that episode coming up on the podcast. And then we'll be recapping the Rams and Niners game on Thursday night. And then that wraps up the week. And then we'll be back to be doing the week that was and will be around the NFL with week number 15 and week number 16 around this NFL season. So very hectic week, but it'll all be worth it in the end. But yeah, until then, like I said, get that lasagna very cold and in the fridge. I've been your host, Dylan Lasagna, and thank you for tuning into this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. Until I see you, when I see you in the next one, peace out.